Albert Henry Tough-Egg Knox was a soldier for the United States of America. However, he was not enlisted in the military during World War II. He had served his country as an Army cook from December 1919 to December 1920, following in his ancestors' footsteps. Generations of his family have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. Knox had already served his country, yet in September of 1941, at the age of 40, he left his small hometown of Cuba City, Wisconsin, boarded a ship, traveled 4,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean to work on an island that was only 2.5 square miles large. Knox, like his father, worked throughout his life as a carpenter. He had decided to offer his skills in the Pacific by joining Morrison Knudsen, a construction organization contracted by the Navy as part of the Contractors Pacific Naval Air Bases, or the CPNAB. As part of Morrison Knudsen, Knox and other civilians constructed buildings on Wake Island, such as the mess hall, the hospital, the airstrip, various barracks, and more. Wake Island was of great strategic importance to the United States. With the island's airstrip, the U.S. could expand its reach throughout the Pacific and, hopefully, place a check on Japan's ever-growing empire. This plan was put on hold when, on December 8, 1941, as part of the coordinated attack on Pearl Harbor and other U.S. bases, Japanese forces struck the island. They expected a relatively easy victory. However, the U.S. Marines stationed on the island, aided by some civilians, fought back against the bombardment and the land invasion. They fought valiantly for 15 days, but were eventually outgunned and defeated on December 23, 1941. After the 15-day attack, the Japanese took Marines and civilians prisoner. The Marines and many of the civilians were sent to China. The remaining 300 civilian contractors, including Knox, continued construction on the island as Japanese prisoners. In October of 1942, all but 98 of the contractors were sent to Japan. Albert Knox was among those who left Wake Island on one of Japan's infamous hell ships. After the terrible journey to Japan, the civilian POWs continued construction work. Knox and the other civilian contractors and the Fukuoka Prisoner of War Camp 18B built what is now known as the Soto Dam in Sasebo, Japan. Knox's name is memorialized there on a plaque, listed among 52 other American POWs and 14 Japanese who died throughout the dam's construction. However, Albert Knox did not die in a construction accident, or even due to exhaustion. At Camp 18B, Knox and the other POWs endured horrible conditions. The men were abused and beaten by guards. Work hours were long and food was scarce. POWs never received adequate medical attention. Guards withheld most of the goods and medicine provided by the International Red Cross. The Japanese did not give the POWs necessary supplies, and the men had to make do with what insufficient clothing they had. After all, they were equipped for the tropics, not Japan's cold winters. Albert Knox made the decision to cut up a blanket for himself to make an article of clothing. His actions angered Lieutenant Uichi Ikegami, the commanding officer. Lieutenant Ikegami put Knox in a 4-foot square solitary confinement cell, and the rest of the camp received beatings. Knox's cell was open air, so it was exposed to the bitter cold. Reports estimate that temperatures were around 0 degrees Fahrenheit. He was beaten and spent days in the solitary cell with insufficient food, water, and warmth. On January 5, 1944, Albert Knox died from malnutrition and exposure. Lieutenant Uichi Ikegami, whose orders were responsible for Knox's death, was brought to trial after the war. He was tried for Knox's death, along with other charges of mistreatment and abuse at Fukuoka. He was convicted and sentenced to death by hanging. However, his sentence was amended to 25 years of hard labor. He was released after 6. Shortly after World War II, Albert Knox's remains were exhumed and laid to rest in the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. During and after the war, the U.S. celebrated the Wake Island defenders as heroes for their determination and sacrifice. Knox, along with all civilian contractors on Wake, received veteran status in 1981. Albert Knox, though not an enlisted soldier, gave his life in service to his country. He chose to leave his home and family to dedicate his expertise to the war effort. Thank you, Albert Knox, for your service.